And welcome back to another Conquest Corner. On this particular episode, we are going to be continuing our deep dive through the different units for the Old Dominion. In particular, we're going to do the Moroi and the Kheres today. So we're going to take a look at pretty much the available light options that this army has. We are probably going to go through most of this army before I get into some of the others. I haven't decided exactly what the goal today. If you're watching on YouTube, you might see this shirt a bunch because I'm hopefully going to be recording several of these today unless I record something different a little bit later. But I want to get through these. You'll see them probably a couple of releases each over the next few weeks, and that way then we can get into some of these other factions and start talking about those as well. So the point of this, I take a look primarily at kits that are double boxes, so we can talk about the two different things you can make out of the box, why you might want one over the other, amounts that you may want, all those sorts of things. It's just a nice natural way to do this discussion. Keep in mind, if you're looking for this or any other Conquest products, on the YouTube, we do have a link in the notes to be able to get yourself 10% off. There's a show code, Terrain Kickers, as well as a link to click on for it. Like I said, you get 10% off. It also helps support the show. So if you'd happen to have any of the stuff you want to pick up or any of this interests you, when we're done, you decide that you're lacking some of these ghosts and you need them, it's a great way to be able to both save yourself some money and help us out as well. All right, so this one will probably be, hopefully, I know I said that on almost every single one of my videos, a little bit shorter. And I think it actually will be because, at least when we take a look at options, there's only one character that even takes these. So we're just looking at the Archimandrite. So the Archimandrite is your only option if you actually want them. As you'll notice, the Kheres are the mainstay. The restricted are the Moroi. Since that's really your only option, you're really looking at 1 to 2. Now, I know you can run double Archimandrite because characters you're allowed to run 2 of, so you theoretically could get to 4, but that's just not a good idea. 1, you'd have to have so many of them. 2, they're light, so you have tons and tons of non-scoring. Yes, I know you can test and all, but if you can't score, you're not really going to win this game. Actually, it's just not going to go well for you. And the only other thing you'd be able to take are Legionnaires or Moroi or Cultists, things that don't score anyway, so it's not a good list. So we're saying 1 to 2 of those, probably honestly 1 to 2 of Kheres as well. Personally, when I run them, I don't always run them. I used to run them a bunch early. I've really stopped running them for quite a while. I just ran them in a game I played versus 100 Kingdoms. I'll talk about the Moroi in that, because that's what I used was Moroi. But it's not that they're not good. We now have a bunch of other choices. I've just been playing with the other choices more. So for options to take them, this is your only option. You have to take the Archimandrite. That's how you get them in the army. So we'll talk about them. Then we'll talk about the ways they support the army, the character choice of what other characters can do, if anything, for them. Just because you can only be taken with Archimandrite doesn't mean that Higher Deacon couldn't help kind of ideas. We'll talk about what they do if they really don't, but we'll get to all that. All right, so both of these are light. They're both infantry. Kheres are 160 points. The Moroi are 180, so reasonably close in points. The Kheres are going to be more of your shooting type unit. The Moroi are more of your light blender unit. Both of these have the base rule that characters cannot go in here. So when you are taking that Archimandrite, you have to take at least a unit of Legionnaires or a unit of Cultists, a regiment of Cultists, in order to then get into these. So that does mean that you are essentially 3 max between the two, no matter what you wanted to do per Archimandrite that you're going to run. Let's discuss a little bit of the stats, and then we'll get into some of the special rules. So where they're the same, they're both move 6, which is good. A lot of our army, our general infantry, tend to be move 5. So that extra inch is really, really worth it. They are both 4 wounds. They both have no resolve, of course, no defense, but they're evade 2. Evade 2 is definitely a feast or famine sort of thing. You'll always have it, but there's not a guarantee that you'll make any of those rolls. And with only 4 wounds each, you might lose stands pretty fast. At 160 and 180, these guys are reasonably expensive. For not necessarily for what they do, but for when you think of like units, getting them out early, they have quite a bit of a cost. So survivability can be a very big issue with them. When you look at the Kheres, so when you look at the shooting unit, they do have a volley of 2 with a clash of 1. That's fine, keep out of combat. And 4 attacks. When you look at the Moroi, they have no volley. They don't shoot anyway. Clash of 2 and 6 attacks. So 6 attacks a stand. That's actually down from what it used to be. For anyone who played before or didn't know, it used to be that every single model, So a stand was always 4 wounds because you had 4 models. You pick off a model for every wound. There used to be 2 attacks per model. That would 8 per stand. Now that they do it as flat stands, they have a little less attacks, but they're just better overall. Or a lot of things are better overall. They might be theoretically a little worse, but still fine. I want to go through the Kheres first. So we're going to discuss them a little bit more in terms of special rules, and we'll talk about their fitting. So first of all, they are devout. Keep in mind, for devout, that means if you get a spell cast on you, 1 failed spell casting die is converted to a success. So when you're targeted by a priest, I should say, that can help because you do have priests in this army. You do have for what could be cast on them. The Hierodeacon spell, sorry, not the Hierodeacon, the Archimandrite spells, that is a priest, so they really only need 1 success for a lot of those spells then, because you're going to auto-convert 1 automatically. For other ones, the Hierodeacon does have spells, but none of them are actually going to help this unit. Of course, both of them are Animate Vessel with Terrifying 1, so we're not going to bother going through that. They are Priest X, and it tells us that essentially, even though they're a block of 3 or 4, however many you put in, you may perform a spellcasting action using 1 stand as if it was a character stand. You're 1 per stand for your priest level up to a max of 12. So each one of your stands counts as essentially a priest 1. So if you make the minimum block of 3, you're a priest 3. You're throwing 3 dice for your spells. That does mean, as we're going to see, one of the memories of old gives them more priest value, so you can actually get to respectable numbers. And they are also a loose formation. Loose formation's a change for them. They used to have strong arm. Strong arm meant that no range penalty, but they removed the range penalties, so they gave them loose information instead. When you're volleying, like I said, these guys do have a shooting attack. When you're volleying against the regiment with the special rule, it halves X. The value of its barrage special will round up to a minimum of 1. So if other people are shooting at you, they half the number of shots. Essentially, it's kind of like you're counting as obscured. In addition, spells will only inflict half the number of hits rounded up against them. It does not stack with obscuring terrain. Furthermore, a regiment cannot, with the special rule, cannot inflict impact hits. My apologies. First, I said because they have a shooting attack. This doesn't care about their shooting. When I'm thinking about it, fluid formation would care about their shooting. The other unit has that. This is when you're shooting at them. If you're firing anything at them, they're taking half the amount of shots coming in. Or spells as well, half the amount of spells coming in. So it makes them a little bit more survivable if you're going to shoot at them to take them down. When we think of their attack, so it's a Barrage 3, 12-inch weapon. It has Sure Shot. Sure Shot is that you don't take negative effects from targeting enemy regiments that are obscuring terrain or drawing line of sight through obscuring terrain. It's somewhat similar to what they had before of that strong arm. A little bit different, but same sort of idea. Essentially, no penalties. They're going to be firing 3s at all times. 12-inch range, so a decent range, but on the shorter side. For this game, really, 12 inches is pretty close. For a unit that is not going to stand well in combat, if someone has a lot of has very strong attacks, so usually if you have really strong attacks, you don't have as many. Evade 2 could help you out. 4 wounds is going to be rough, but Evade 2. But if someone has just a lot of attacks, Evade 2, you're just going to lose out. They also, like I said, they're memories of old. They get 1 extra priest per stand. So when I took them, I would take them in blocks of 4 or 5. They are 50 points extra for an extra 1. So I would take them at 210, 260. Sort of one of those 2 ranges. That means you're at least at priest 4 or 5. Then when you get your memories of old, you can be close to priest 10. If there has been cases where I absolutely needed the spells, and we'll talk about the spells in a second, where in a later turn, if say I'm tier 3, where now I can use my memories old as a draw event as well, I did the draw and then cast the spell. Because I might not have been in well positioned, or I was worried about how much dice I'm going to get in terms of my shot, or it was just a bad positioning sort of thing. But since you can cast your spell from one of them, only one of them needs line of sight for magic, where they all would need line of sights for shooting. So I've had cases where I'm tier 3 if these guys are still alive, and I'm going to get that maximum of 12 dice because I'll have enough, usually, or especially if I've been hurt, then I might need to do it just to get enough dice to actually be able to get the spells off. But if I have, say, 3 stands left, I can, or maybe even 4 stands left, I can get to that 12 or close to that 12. And now I can actually really do some good magic on them. So both of these guys do have magic. I think we'll go through them fully here. So let's talk about the magic here. Drain Will. I don't use this one nearly as much. It's good. I just don't. A 12-inch range, attunement 3, scaling, of course. If you get 2 to 4 successes, and remember, for spells, you need 2. For spells like this, obviously. You reduce their defense by 1 until the end of the round. So you can lower people's defenses. If you're going against someone where that is a big concern, this can really help out. I haven't used it as much just because I haven't run them lately. If I was running them more now, especially with certain Dweg things I see out there, I might. In addition, if you get 4 or more successes, then the target enemy regiment also takes 1 extra hit from our death special rule until the end of the round. Now, this was clarified by game designers because there's a few different spots where this comes up. Liquid Anathema on Cultists it comes up on as well. That when it says you take 1 additional hit, that's to the overall total. So the way this works, you're not taking hits per stand when you're doing aura death in reality. What you're doing is you're taking aura death hits. And if I have, say, we're going to get to the Moroi, they have aura death 3. So every one of my stands that you're touching, you're going to add 3 to the amount of aura death hits that you take. It's not actually coming as a per stand sort of idea. It's more of a pool that the stands contribute into. So the fact that you get 1 additional hit, is to the overall total, not per stand. So the Moroi are base aura death 3. It's aura death 3 per stand that you're touching. Then add 1 to the very end. It's not as if they were a 4 per stand. Here it's reasonably clear, but there's other spots where the wording is a little different. There's been talk that they're going to clean that up in the future. A good spell, don't get me wrong, the lower level, the extra 1 of aura death isn't really that big. 1, they have to be taking aura death hits for it to work anyway. And we do have that in the army, but if you're not taking Bone Golems, Moroi, or you're not using Archimandrite spells, you're not really getting it anyway. Better spell for them, at least the one I use a lot more, is Insanity. Attunement 3, notice it is not scaling. So hit as big of a unit as you want, and the next part of it, it won't help that big unit anyway. Range is 10 inches. So you roll your dice. The attunement's much better. It used to be attunement 2, so 3 is much, much more reliable. This spell has actually gotten much better. You inflict 2 hits per successful hit on the target enemy. So for every 3 or less that you get 2 hits on them. Here's where it gets interesting. That enemy unit rolls defense rolls using their lowest unmodified resolve characteristic instead of their defensive characteristic. So in essence, they take a resolve stat check. They don't take a resolve test per se, but they take a resolve stat check. You also are using the lowest, so where this is especially good is if a unit is being buffed because they're large, so they're getting a +1 or +2 to their resolve. They got a really good, strong character in there. All of that, none of that applies. Actually, I was just playing 100 Kingdoms as of time of recording this about 2 days ago. And 100 Kingdoms, they usually run very large blocks if they're doing that to be able to up their resolve stats. Characters sometimes a little bit better resolve, but their general guys are pretty bad resolve, often like 2s. Theoretically worse, but usually a lot of times on like 2s. All right, well, if that's the case, if they're on 2s, then you don't care about all those other bonuses. You're getting 2 per. If you can get a good amount through, you might get a good amount of hits into these guys. Now, this naturally doesn't cause a morale test, even though it's magic, because it specifically says that it doesn't. We'll get into the higher tiers in a second. In the early levels, if you can target enemies that have bad resolve or would have good resolve because of bonuses and characters and things like that, or would have good armor, this is a great spell to throw at them because you can get wounds on someone that you might be struggling against. Especially before we had our Bucephaly and before we had a Varangian Guard. This was the way I hurt high armor targets, because if they don't have a good resolve or they only have it because of various bonuses, now I can get into them. Now, like I said, no morale test on this. Should the Dark Power pool reach tier 2, then any wounds caused by this spell cause an additional 1 wound for every modified roll of 6. So, when they get to tier 2, if they roll a 6 on that resolve roll, they take an extra wound. This effect is cumulative when you reach tier 3. So this still happens at tier 3. And the other part is when you reach that tier 3, then it causes morale. So tier 1, 2 hits per success. tier 2, your 6s will now do an extra wound when they take this, when they do a resolve roll. So here's a very important, careful distinction, especially if you have an opponent, and this has been clarified quite well currently. Rules could change, but currently by game designers, it's a resolve roll, not a resolve test. So there's the distinction. When you roll your dice using your resolve stat, it is a resolve roll. It may not necessarily truly be a resolve test. So they're not testing their resolve, they're doing a resolve roll for their defense, essentially. So what that means is when they're rolling saves versus this, and they're saving at tier 2 or tier 1 as well, but essentially they're saving on the resolve stat, any 6s cause an extra wound. Then it says, hey, it's cumulative in tier 3, so it continues happening in tier 3. The other nice part is that then in tier 3, it causes morale tests. Here's why that matters. That means when you're in tier 3, when you're making your morale test is a resolve roll, which means that your unmodified 6s on your resolve test also trigger the extra wound. This was all quite nicely, if you go on the Discord, all of this was actually quite nicely clarified and talked through. Is essentially these are all and conditions. When you go to the next tier, you have this, and you have the other thing, and you have the next thing. So it all stacks very nicely together. So as a simple example, let's say you shoot into an enemy unit and you got 3 successes, which means that you got 6 hits. All right, they roll, and let's say you're a higher tier. So in tier 1, they're going to roll the resolve. It doesn't matter what if they roll all 6s, let's say. They roll all 6s, they still only have taken 6 wounds. Let's say now you're tier 2. Now you're tier 2, same thing. You got 3 hits, 6 in, and they failed all 6 on 6s, because we're talking about just maximums so we can make sense of these numbers. Well, each of those 6s count as 2. So now instead they've taken 12 wounds. All right, when you get to tier 3, all right, 3 hits in, 3 successes, which means 6 hits. All right, so you got 6 hits on them. They roll their 6 dice. They roll all 6s. They wish they were playing 40k instead. All right, that means essentially they have now taken 12 wounds. All right, now they go to do their resolve test, or morale test, I should say, because morale now happens at tier 3. They're taking the morale on 12 wounds, because that's how many wounds you've actively done to them. If they rolled 6s on this morale test, every 6 is 2 more wounds. So that means, like in this case where you got those 3 hits and they're maxing everything out every time, if you're on tier 3, they're taking 12 to start from essentially the wounds coming in, and then from the morale, if you rolled 6s all again, every one of those is 2 more. You could theoretically have 36 wounds going into this. Now, is that going to happen? Obviously, no. But it's important to realize that at tier 3, if they're alive still at tier 3, that all those 6s, at any time when your opponent is saving, every 6 is doing 2. So you can do tons and tons of damage to people. That's the reason they cap you at the 12. Because if not, if they're actually alive at tier 3, yeah, I would just, I draw event +1 die. I would use it and my memories of old +1 die, all of that to get as many dice as possible. This spell can do tons and tons of damage. You got to be alive long enough for it, and that's the big problem. One other thing I want to clarify for both this and the other unit, because I was a little confused about this until I read more about it. You'll notice it's when the Dark Power Pool reaches. So Dark Power Pool reaches tier 2. Dark Power Pool reaches tier 3. If you look at certain abilities, so let's close those guys out for a moment. And again, I put this out in an audio-only format. I will always explain what I'm doing, but if you're watching, you can see me scroll along if you have that kind of fun. Let's look at the Supremacy ability for Strategos to make sure we're clear on how something here works. For the Strategos' ability, he uses Supremacy. Until the end of the round, all friendly regiments in the army count the current empowerment tier as 1 higher. It's not that the pool is 1 higher. They pretend like it is. That does not benefit them. So, because their rule says when the dark power pool tier 2, you are not actually tier 2 with his ability. If you use it when you're in tier 1, you're just pretending like you're tier 2. This has also been clarified by Parabellum Games that you don't get the extra benefits there. If it says you need the pool to be X level, the pool is only X level when it's naturally there. If you do buffs, like the Strategos' Supremacy, or the Archimandrite's, is it Dark Immolation? No. I always forget which one. Blasphemous Power. There it goes. I always forget which one's which. Blasphemous Power says that you count as if you're under 1 tier higher. What this really affects is things like draw events and stuff like that. If your specific thing says you must be tier 2 to have it, like these spells and all do, you don't get the bonus there. It has been clarified by them. I think they said they might clean up some of the wording, but that does make that difference. So if you're level 1 and use the Archimandrite on one of these, you count them like they're tier 2, but the pool is not tier 2. So your draw event, let's pull back up the Kheres and Moroi. Sorry, just give me a sec. There. Alphabetical order, you think I'd be better at that. When we look at their memories of old, you will get that because you're counting like your tier was 1 higher. But your spell that says the pool needs to be a higher tier than you are now doesn't help. So, an important distinction to make that is a little nuanced, but very important to know. All right, so let's get into uses for Kheres in general. I really do enjoy the Kheres. I do like what they do. I especially like if I can get the tier 2 or maybe even tier 3, and if I'm in a good position. I barrage shot into people, and then I insanity into them. Drain Will is a good spell as well, lowering people's defenses and stuff. I don't use it quite as much because insanity, especially now, is so much better than it used to be. But if you get within that half range, if you're outside of 6, so you're close to someone, maybe on a flank or something like that, you could get 4 shots for each of your stands, assuming you don't have any stands behind, but let's say you were 3 or 4 wide. You're going to get 4 shots a stand each. No resolve and those sort of things, but then you're going to insanity into them. There may or may not be a resolve. By the time you're going to get that close, you should be tier 2 at least anyway. So at least if they're rolling 6s, you're getting some extras in. You can actually start doing a lot of damage to people. The problem is you're not really survivable. If they get into close combat, you're just going to have to run because you're only clash 1. The magic you could still do. So you could always magic and then leave, but you're not really going to want to swing. It's not going to do you any good. At this moment, it's probably they're a little better than they used to be. One, insanity is better, but also because now you do have these bigger targets. Earlier in the army, when you didn't have your Kefli, you didn't have your Varangian Guard, you maybe only had your Cataphracti. They were the main, early, these guys were the target, or either one of them, and then Cataphracti, and then now you have a lot more targets, so these guys might go a little bit unnoticed, or you can be a little more cagey with them, kind of keep them back a little bit. We'll talk about other effects you can get for both of them through Archimandrites and all, like the Archimandrite healing them up or counting their pool as higher so you can get those extra dice. Without the Memory of Old, you're probably not realistically getting the spell off very well, but when you do, 2 dice per stand, now you're actually really starting to go somewhere. So the problem is that you're reasonably fragile. With 4 wounds on a 2 up or a 2 under save, I should really say, for this game, you'll go down a lot faster than you think. Although you get spells on them much easier with that Devout. So, all right, let's talk a bit about the Moroi, and then we'll kind of do some comparisons and talk a little bit more about it. So, remember, these guys are Clash 2 with 6 attacks. These are your Blender type unit. Their Fluid Formation is a great rule for them to have. You get a free additional reform action during activation. It either has to be before you start any activations, essentially your action, or after your actions are done. So you get to do it before you do anything or after you're done doing everything. Your line of sight is any arc, stuff like that. There's no worry about the volley part or anything like that. But you have line of sight from all your arcs, not just from your front and everything like that, which helps. All right, pause there briefly just to, there's 2 rules to look up, but it's fine. So floor formation is great for them. That means they're never truly out of position because when they go, they can do some good rotation, or you can reform to get more ranks in. So you could start them as a little tight 4 block, which is sometimes what I do. I'll do the floor formation when the time comes to widen them out before I charge them into people. So they have Aura Death 3. Remember, Aura Death is when you start in base with them. So the way this works, if an enemy draws their card while they're in base with them, they're going to suffer hits depending on your Aura Death number for every stand of theirs that they are touching of yours. So if it's a little 3 block and someone in their unit is touching these 3 stands, hey, that's Aura Death 9. So 9 hits, Aura Death 3 per stand, 9 hits total. They go into some more details, but that's the essence of it. There's some weird things about like when you draw the card versus not, all that kind of stuff, and it does happen before draw events. So, and if you're in a garrison, obviously it doesn't happen. So you can read a little bit more about that for some of the nuance, but most of the easy cases. Aura Death 3, it no longer does morale test, or Aura Death no longer does morale tests in general. That's why the Aura Death is better than it used to be. I believe it used to be 2 before. Since there's no more morale, most people went up by about 1 on Aura Death. Some people did 2. I did have that do a lot of good to me the other day because it was a unit that I just couldn't get the number of swings into. I with my other unit, I just didn't have it. So this unit went in there. I would use an Archimandrite to buff them to Aura Death 5. So now if you go off, every one of my stands that you're touching, that's 5 Aura Death hits for each of them. There was 4 stands in that particular grouping. That's 20 hits. Nice auto hits. I might not be resolving, but I'm okay with that. The other things, Animate Vessel, terrifying. Everyone gets those. They have spells as well. Memories of Old, real fast first. Priest +1 per stand and Cleave 1. So when you get to tier 2 or count as tier 2, that Cleave 1 now means 6 attacks. Naturally on 2s, and that does make it a bit rough. But on 2s, 3s when you get to charge in, or 3s if you survive somehow to tier 3. The Cleave 1 means now you actually are helping to blender units. If they have a decent defense, you're at least lowering it by 1 so you can start cutting through people. Didn't mention it before with the Kheres, but they are on volley too. Obviously, they could take the aim action. I almost never do if I can reach with the spell, or if I can move and get in range with the spell, because I want to do both things instead. So both of their base attack don't necessarily do that much. Kheres get a lot of variability from spells. Moroi don't. I guess it's Moroi is probably what it's supposed to be. I always say Moroi, but it's Cataphracti, Bukefel, E-O-I is E. So Moroi. Let me start saying Moroi because that's actually more correct. They do have 2 spells as well. The big thing you'll notice is they base do not have any spellcasting dice. They need Memories of Old to do it. And they're only getting 1 die per stand. So you're looking at, if you take a minimum 3 block, that you have to be at least tier 2 before you can cast any of your magic or count as tier 2. And then you're only going to have 3 dice, which starts becoming a bit of a problem. When we look at Immolation is 3. It's scaling. So that makes it a little rough because this is on themselves and they are not devout. Because I said it does count as priest, but they're not devout, so they don't get that bonus either. It ups their Aura Death, where X is the number of successes scored divided by 2 rounded up. So if you get 2 successes, half of it rounded up is 1, so you can up your Aura Death by 1. That's in essence what it does. Okay, seems like the dog was going to bark. He's kind of stopped barking. Immolation sounds nice. It sounds nice that if they're already in combat, because if you keep in mind, you're not allowed to inspire, so if you're already in combat, there's not much for you to do other than swing and hang out if you're not going to take them down. So if you could go before the opponent, then you could swing at them and then immolate yourself. So that way when they go later, they have even more hits that they're going to take. Translocation. Again, self, attunement 3, it's scaling. You get to perform a free additional 8-inch march. Now, with this, you do have to spend an action to cast the spell. So it is a free additional 8-inch march, but essentially you have one more move. You have an 8-inch move instead of a 6-inch move. However, you get to ignore anything between you, whether it's stands, characters, terrain. You have to be placed in legal position at the end. You can't overlap any other regiment stands. Unlike a normal move where you could do 2 moves and it's okay as long as you're legal position at the end, you have to be legal position after the 1 here. You can't use this and then do the normal move to do something extra with you. It can even be used if you're currently engaged, so you can just leave. You can move around. And while performing this move, this regiment may move sideways and or backwards without having its march characteristic. So if you're in a bad position and you'd rather be somewhere else, if you get this spell off, just go there. You get 8-inch move. That means that you could literally hopscotch over people. If they're trying to block a charge, if they leave enough space for you to fit between, you could literally go forward in between them and then charge in, depending on distances, of course. It means if they put you into a unit that you don't want to be stuck with, you could just leave. Leave and go charge a different unit. Leave and go somewhere else. So the utility is there to an extent. 8 inches is not as far as you would think, because if you're talking about trying to leave from engagements and all, with the width of stands and all and how wide you are, you really don't get quite as much play as you think, but it does give you some options, especially if they hit you from a side. You could literally just slide past them to then go to the better target you prefer, or to move where it's more advantageous, whatever it is you're trying to do. So for Moroi, they are very good in terms of a blender unit. Again, the clash isn't great, but on the charge in, they're pretty good. And the aura death will hurt people coming back, especially if people are not huge defense. If they're more middling defenses, you get a lot of good, especially if you can get into sides and flanks and rears and spot like that, where they're not getting certain other bonuses. Their spells, though, don't help them. Here's why. So one, like I said, they have no priest to begin with. Kheres do. Moroi, then, when you take a look at them, if you're a 3 block, then you now have 3 dice to do these spells on. Okay, here we go. I paused the video briefly if you're watching so I could pull up scaling, because this matters here. Matters a lot. When you look at scaling, so it talks about what scaling does. Obviously, you have more things that makes it tougher, whereas there's the scaling. For 1 to 4 stands, you don't need any additional successes. But as soon as you get to 5 to 7, you need 1 more, 8 to 9, you need 2, and so on. You're not going to get these guys to 10, where it'd be 3. But here's why that matters so much. That means if you're taking a 4 block, you're on 4 dice. Now, if you got to tier 3, you could technically get to 8 dice if you still had 4 stands, because your memories of old will go off. And then you use them as well. So it's a draw event, and then you can use them as an action event if you were tier 3. But that's one of your 2 actions, and then you just have these spells, which means when you use one, then you're out of things to do. And yeah, on 8 dice, you'll probably get either one you want, but unless you really need that level 5 or a death, because Immolation caps you at level 5 for a death, it's not going to do you much. All right, well, let's say you want the spells earlier. If you want them earlier, you probably need more than 4 stands. Now you're looking at 5 or 6. I have 6 painted stands, so I've taken that number before. But with 6, now scaling comes into play, which means you need extra success, which means you need 3 successes on each of these. Since you're only on a 3, that's 50-50 on each of those dice. So you're not terribly likely to get it to go off. Again, it's 50-50 per die, and you need half of the dice. So you're looking about half of the time. Which means your immolation, then you could potentially get up to that. If you get it to succeed, you'll be at or death 5, great. You could get your translocation, but that's about it. As you want more stands to get the spells to do better, then it makes it harder to do the spells. In general, they're never better than about a 50-50. Maybe you can get a little bit better depending on some numbers or certain things like that, but you're not getting much better than that. Even if you are, even if it was, say, 60-some% of the time. I don't think the spells are worth it for that. If I'm already stuck in combat, I'll go for immolation, because why not? But otherwise, translocation has not served me that well. And I'd rather have the 6 move than maybe get the 8. In most cases. Again, there's going to be some niche cases we could talk about, but I find it doesn't really do as much. If they were essentially priest 1 each stand to start with, much like the Kheres are, the Moroi would be much, much better. You would actually use their spells. You would be fine taking the action for it. Right now, the way I see for the Moroi, I move them forward as I can. I try to be cagey because, again, they're 4 wounds each on 2 evade, not super survivable. They really need the charge. If someone charges them, Clash of 2 is really tough to cut through good people with. I'll be cagey with them. I want them to hit at tier 2, and that could either be the Archimandrite pushing them there, counting as, or the Strategos counting them as, so they get their memories of old, so they get the cleave. 6 attack a stand on 3s on the charge in turn with cleave, you will absolutely get damage on people. People aren't going to want to have to sit there in close combat trying to take you down, because since you don't resolve, if you happen to make a few of those evades, or they can't fully kill you out, now you're stuck in, and if you can get in there first, you're doing aura death, so you're potentially getting double shots onto them. So the Moroi, I think, are really good for that purpose, although just in general, they're more expensive and not nearly as good as the Kheres are. So with our more options now, I really don't take them. I took them the other day because I wanted to take something I haven't taken in a while. And they were fun, and they did well for me. But overall, like I said, I had to run a 4-block. I'm looking at 240 points. I don't know. Was it worth its points? Probably no. Was it fun to do? Sure. But we now have better options in terms of combat and blenders and all. If you think of blender, Anati are 170, so just about the same points, a little bit cheaper. They have those 6 attacks. They're on 2s as well, but they have flurry, so they're re-rolling. Yeah, they don't have the cleave, but we have other things with cleave. And if I'm going to get a lot more hits, I'm okay with that difference of that cleave of 1. And Nafti have a way to always be inspired. They can take the, Precepts. I think it's the Precepts that does that. So they could be on 3s re-rolling. They're now going to hit 75% of the time. That's worth it over me for the cleave. And I think they're cheaper per each stand as well. Am I right about that? Yeah, they're 50 points an extra stand. So I could get, a 4-pack of each. I had to pay maybe a little bit extra for that princess. Well, I'm looking at, if I'm doing it this way, they're what? The Moroi would be for a 4-pack. We're looking at an extra 60, so 240. For these guys, you're looking at putting on 50 on top, so you're looking at 220, so about 245 instead of 240. So 240, 245. So about the same for 4 stands of each, same amount of attacks. Fluid formation is really big. Obviously, you could have a character go in there. Bodyguards is something. They have leaders, so they have an extra attack in one of the spots. Your ghosts don't have leaders. Counterattack, so you can do some damage back to people potentially. You're always inspired. And flurry means you're going to get more successful hits in general. You're really banking on, for the Moroi, that you're going to get that aura death in, so you're going to get the charges. If you're not getting charges, that unit is doing garbage for you. The other reason that they were somewhat okay for me is an Archimandrite near them to be healing them. Otherwise, I would have had 1 stand by the time they finally got in. They started at 4, down the 2, healed back. I want to say both stands, actually, before they went in. So the Moroi needs something. Give them Devout. I think that could be enough. Give them Base Priest. I think could be enough as well without Devout. But with our options now, I don't rank them very high. The Kheres I still do. I didn't run the Kheres the other day just because I didn't have space. But I absolutely still rank the Kheres very high. I rank them high because their spells are very strong. Like I said, I don't use Drain Will as much, but it is a very good spell. Insanity is a great spell. The fact that they are base 1 priest per stand. When you get to tier 2 or count as tier 2, at least, then you're plus an extra 1 per stand. And if they can survive till late in the game, Insanity can do tons and tons of work. Especially if the opponent just happens to be rolling 6s on things. And that does mean you have to pay attention to tier 4 bonuses as well. Because if you happen to be able to get to the tier 4 where the 6s on the morale test cause 2 as well, you have that as well. Their barrage attack, decent, not amazing, but the spell with the barrage is quite nice. Like I said, I've gotten to spots where I can put both onto an opponent, and now I can really start getting some damage into them. That loose formation also means that they're a little bit safer from other people's shooting type units as you're moving forward. Of the two, if I could only build one, if I used our discount code Terrain Kickers and the link below and bought myself some boxes, because I'll shill, I don't care. I don't have standards like that. I would build Kheres. They are more annoying to build. So my Kheres aren't here. You'll see them if you're looking on YouTube, they'll be in the picture. But for the Kheres, I have one of their weapons here. The big arm that the Kheres has is much more annoying to put on because it's much heavier. I use plastic glue for this, and I do have to very carefully position because it'll slowly start moving around. And I don't put half of the chains with the incense burners on them. I think I think my Mori have them one per, and the other ones I Kheres I didn't even bother with because finding out where they went was annoying. No, they're not the most fun models to put together personally. Very fun to paint, but not fun to put together. If I was only going for one, I'd go for Kheres, absolutely. If I was having two boxes, I'd probably build two boxes of Kheres. If you're like me and you're a completionist, then I would start going to Moroi. I do have 6 stands of each. I have run both of them. Yeah, a giant block of Moroi will do you a lot of good. They can do a lot, but of the two, I don't get that same sort of feeling. It's harder to get close enough. They will be a target. People will be shooting them down or will be charging you instead. And since they're light, they're coming in earlier. Assuming they come in early, they could take down the other person's light unit, or maybe the other person pushes their light unit, or they shoot them down, or those sort of options. They might be the only big target you have in the first 2 rounds, which means it's easy to zero in on them. So, again, they've done me well. I'm just not as thrilled. If I'm only doing one, I'm doing Kheres. If you're a completionist, you can easily go for both. I would never be running more than one Moroi unit. I could theoretically run 2 Kheres. I think for Kheres, you almost have to go to 4. 3, I think the problem is if you lose even a stand, your spells aren't happening really anymore, and you want your spells because your spells are super, super important to you. So I would run them as a 4-pack. Running them as more can do you more as well, but at least a 4-pack. For Moroi, I think they had to be at least a 4 or 5. I think you could do the 3. I'll put it this way. You're not going to care about the magic, so a 3-pack isn't bad to try to get them cheap, to try to get a nice, cheap, deny scoring unit to push forward, hit someone that the Aura Death is going to hurt, maybe blender some damage into them and sit there for a little while. Not for too long. They probably can go as 3s, 4 or 5 or better. For Kheres, I think you want to go to 4. Again, more could be better, but I think you're looking at minimum 4 for them. Yeah, I guess for the Moroi, 3 was be okay, but again, if someone has some shooting, if you don't roll really good on 1s and 2s, you're going to be out of stands. And if the Archimender's not close enough to heal, you got a problem. For things that support both of them, Archimender obviously does. Archimender can count their tiers 1 higher, so they can get their Memories of Old, which both need. Or Dark Immolation. You can up Aura Death on theoretically either one. If someone gets into your Kheres, you could be doing that. You could heal them up. Hazlia's Touch. So it works really well even early on because Hazlia's Touch heals 1 plus X wounds, whereas the current tier of the Dark Power pool, that means if you've lost 1 full stand, you need 2 wounds to heal back to do it. That means you can do it when you're tier 1. So you can get them back pretty fast as well. For other things that buff them, honestly, not much, because we already talked about how the Strategos ability and the Blasphemous Power only help their Memories of Old. It doesn't help their spell type things and other pieces because it doesn't happen there. You can't put characters in with them, so that's a no-go. No one else can take them. The Hierodeacon spells don't aid, really. And these are not great targets for Dark Shepherd because they were very expensive. The only times they're good targets for Dark Shepherd is the Archimendrites nearby to heal back those wounds. I have used that in the past just to be a battery source, but I'd rather do into unit of Legionnaires, who I care much less about. Legionnaires perform for me just by scoring, just by sitting there. These don't score, so I got to do something more with them. I don't see a whole lot of other buffs, so I think if you are running them, I think you are looking at, obviously you have to have an Archimendrite. I think you're looking at an Archimendrite potentially being your leader for that Scholar of Profane, so you can cast an extra spell. I think you are potentially looking, I usually always, at least to some extent, where is it? Treasure? I always forget where is the thing I want. No, that's a Dark Blessing. Where is it? There it is. Own Holy Mastery. That means if it is your Warlord, you can cast multiple. You can be up to 3 spells potentially each of these rounds. I think you have that. I think if you are not taking the Archimendrite as the Warlord, I think you absolutely want that on you. If you have any running 2 of them, then you could absolutely take, was it Concentrated Miter? That's what, a treasure? Yeah, the Consecrated Miter. To count your tiers higher. It's related to the pool itself, so that way you can get more dice for more reliability, especially because you have a pretty good attack spell. If I run 2, I run the leader with the miter, and I run the other one with get an extra cast, Unholy Mastery. Couldn't remember the names. If I'm going to run a bunch of them, I'm probably running the double Archimedrag list because I want to be able to heal both of these units. And I can do that then. If I'm running just about anything else, I might take one of them just because I feel like it or feel like taking some lights. Or like I said, right now, we really don't have lights. A lot of our lights are the units that aren't available yet. So for legal tournament play, these are really your lights beyond, obviously, the Fallen Divinity. If you're taking Fallen Divinity, absolutely don't take these. I don't take them because the Fallen Divinity, yes, the Fallen Divinity scores, but it only counts as 2 stands ever. And you run into problems if you have way too many light, you're not going to score enough. And that is an issue. And I ran into that issue the other day because I had, a unit of cultists, a unit of Moroi, and a unit of the Centaur Prodami. Because I was testing those out. Because I want to do the Centaur unit soon, but I want to try both of them first. And then it was mission 1 from the card pack, which was 6 objectives. I already had 3 light units. I only had like 3 or 4 other units that could score. So it made it rough. The game still came very close. I was able to take it out. And when I talk about my Cataphracti unit took out like 1,000 points in one turn. One of their goes. So I ended up going well, but because I couldn't score early, I was down huge in points. So even though I took out like half the other army, I was still down huge until like turn 9. So, all right. I think that belabors enough for these 2 units. If you're going with either of them, the Kheres are the better. I really do think the Kheres are a really, really good unit. The Moroi needs something. I don't know what it is. Now, they balance pretty well in this game. At some point, they'll probably get a little bit of a rebalance, and that'll help them. But for right now, if you're going to build them, build up your Kheres, save your Moroi, and look to some of our other units that we have for your attacking and your blendering, because now we actually have them around. All right, that does it for this particular video. As always, thank everyone who does watch. You should be seeing this. I'm recording this on Tuesday. You'll be seeing this either late Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning. You should see at least one more other thing from me this week with this. We should hopefully be recording another episode of the podcast now that Dan's feeling a bit better. He's able to sit comfortably. I said it before, but for anyone who didn't know, Dan ended up having to have some surgery. But now he's able to at least sit at his computer and all. So we're hopefully going to get back to doing some recordings. A lot of it depends on his health. We're obviously taking it seriously depending on how he sees, but if his health is in such a way where we can record, we absolutely will. If not, you'll be seeing more stuff from me, especially because I've been doing a lot of resin printing lately, waiting for some other safety things to come in, so I might not be printing over the next day or 2, which means I'll be doing more recording. So you should see another video related to Old Dominion. I'm going to try to get the 100 Kingdoms video out as well. That might be more of like weekend or early next week. And then a few more videos to finish out Old Dominion. I'm probably going to be trying to record them all this week, whether or not you'll see them this week. And then some Imperialis stuff. If you're interested in Legions Imperialis, right now there's a video up for at least a few more days as of time of seeing this for you to tell me what Legion army I'm painting, because I don't know which one to do, so you're making the decision for me. That way I don't have to. I'm also going to put up some video as I finish up my Solar Auxilia to talk about them, list ideas, and exactly what I'm going to do with those. And we'll have battle reports for them coming up hopefully in about another week or so. We're going to be recording those. All right, I think that belabors it all enough for here. So on behalf of everyone here at the show, then, have some good hobbying and some great gaming.